Hey guys, in today's video, I'm going to be reviewing Writing in the Dark by Tim Waggoner, a new book out on writing horror. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's your girl Laura here over at Laura Writes. Ding! And if you're new here, hi, I'm Laura. I write young adult horror, and I am currently on a journey towards trying to become traditionally publish, and I like to chronicle that journey here on my channel. But something else I like to do is to read writing craft books and discuss them with people, and also review them to let you know if they're worth reading. And so the book that I'm going to be reviewing today is Writing in the Dark by Tim Waggoner. So first, just to give you a little bit of context, that book came out this fall of 2020. It is very new with relevant references. If you guys know, that is one of my biggest complaints of writing craft books, is it takes so long to get them out, and they're trying to appeal to everyone that they pick just old, or just like, why did you choose that book to like give examples from? And this book in particular has so many references, and there are so many that are relevant, and so all of the references are newer or really well known in horror. In fact, there were a lot that I was like, I don't know that reference, but it's my own fault for not being well versed enough in horror. But there's definitely enough, and he references both books and movies, which I totally appreciate because I know way more horror movies than I do books, but I'm working on that. He is definitely someone who is worthy to speak on this topic because he's very active in like the Horror Writers Association. I can't remember if that's like the exact title of it, but you know, that big group of horror writers. He's been nominated and has won so many like awards for writing books of horror. He's written like IP for some really big franchises like Supernatural and some other stuff. So he's kind of like a big deal. And he also is a creative writing teacher, and he not only like allows but encourages his students, and sometimes even assigns them to write horror. So I really think that he has the ethos and the credibility to write this book and to discuss this topic. So typically what I like to do in my reviews is I like to start with the pros, and then I go into the cons, and then I give you an overall, what did I think and who do I think should read this, if anyone, because sometimes there are books that I don't think anyone needs to read. If you're curious about those and you have not seen all of my previous book reviews, I will link a playlist down in the description. This is probably my, I don't know, maybe like 10th book review, maybe. I also like to review masterclasses. I'm going to be reviewing R.L. Stine's masterclass coming up soon. So if that's something that you're interested in and you have not already subscribed to this channel, please be sure to hit the subscribe button down below so you don't miss that. But anyway, let's get into the pros of Writing in the Dark. Okay, so I really liked that right off the bat, the book starts out explaining to you why horror matters. So many people are against horror, or they think they don't like horror, or they think it's just some stupid genre with just like spiders and fake blood. And he really talks about the value of writing horror, the value of reading horror, what it does for us emotionally, psychologically. I really feel like he makes you realize how important it really is. And I really, really appreciated that. And I thought it was a good way to set the tone for the rest of the book. And along with that, he also talks about the pros and cons of writing horror, how it's kind of seen in the publishing field, how having that marketing can affect, you know, your book, because as we all know, sometimes books that are technically horror are not being labeled as horror as a marketing thing. So he kind of talks a little bit about that, and he really does give some advice on like branding and how to kind of push those kind of things from like, you know, a professional perspective. And I really thought that that was a great addition because you don't see a lot of that in like writing craft books. And I want to say that overall, this is a great primer for horror. I mean, he touches on all of the things, classic tropes, types of horrors. He gives warnings about pitfalls that people often find themselves in, that they often end up writing things that are misogynistic or racist or ableist. He really just covers the full gambit. And I think that like if you really wanted like a fundamental, you know, seminal text on writing horror, you know, in the 21st century, I think that he really like is a contender for that. Another thing that I really liked about this book is that he included so many other horror writers, he found a great way to not just be like, hey, this is my opinion and this is the opinion. He included so many other people's opinions. In fact, every single chapter ends with him. He had like a set of questions that he asked a ton. I couldn't even tell you, maybe more than 20, 30, I don't even know. It was a lot of horror writers, a set of questions, and they had their answers at the end of every chapter. So there was at least 2 to 3 horror writers that gave their advice and their tips and their thoughts about writing horror at the end of every single chapter. And I really, really appreciated that a lot, because sometimes in writing craft books, the writer will take on this air of, I am the, you know, voice on this topic. I am the person to listen to. And he's just like, hey, this is my voice, and here's a whole bunch of other voices that you should listen to and take all of this in. So I really appreciated that a lot. And it gave me a lot of new people to look into, like, oh, I liked that answer, or oh, I've never heard of this person. And so I really think, again, going back to that idea of it being like a primer, it really exposes the reader to a lot of writers and texts and thoughts about the horror genre. Another thing I really like that's at the end of those chapters is he gives a lot of great exercises, and they're not just exercises on what to do. So he gives all kinds of exercises. Like, there's some that are like, this is what you should do with the book that you're already working on. And then one is like, here's to help you generate ideas. And then he also has stuff like, here are things that are cliche. Why don't you avoid these? And then there's like, here's these things that are like cliche, but here are some interesting ways that you could do something different with it. And it really felt like he was trying to help the reader. Like, he wasn't being a gatekeeper or like an arbiter of taste, but rather saying like, yo, I'm here to help you. Like, I don't want you to do this thing that's gonna hurt you in your writing, or here, let me help you. Like, really a teachery, like hands-on way. In fact, he had a whole list of like, here are possible topics that I think are really good horror topics that you could write on, you know? And a lot of people don't want to give away, you know, the secret sauce. So I really, really appreciated that. It really made me feel like he cared about the reader, that he really wanted them to learn something, and that he really genuinely wanted people to be excited and to do well. A lot of the chapters are fantastic in breaking down different elements of horror. What he calls like the horror palette, the physiology of horror, the psychology of horror, types of pain, all kinds of things like that. In fact, there's a ton of appendices at the end of the book that I found really, really helpful as well. On like, it shows him doing a critique of a story about like why something wasn't as good the first time he wrote it and how he like fixed it or what he saw in it. There's questionnaires, ideas, links to resources. I mean, he really gave you everything. Like, this could be a textbook, but it doesn't read like a textbook. You're not like, oh, I don't understand why they're using all these words. Like, it feels very approachable, very easy to understand, and you really feel like the passion, and it makes you feel that way too about the genre. You're like, wow, this is actually like a really cool thing, like, that I'm working on, you know? So I really liked that. And then he doesn't just talk about horror. He does stick in there. I mean, he's going in the vein of horror, but he does talk about suspense, and he talks about tips on writing action, and he gives stuff about just like overall characterization, character development. I mean, there's whole chapters on that. So there's whole sections on that. So I really feel like he wasn't just like, this is horror. He's really talking about writing in general and really helping you. He's trying to say basically like, if you're gonna write horror, you still have to write a good story. And here are some things that you don't want to forget, because sometimes when people write horror, they forget these things. And this is something I've been coming across personally as I've been really reading a lot more horror lately, is that sometimes people focus so much on like the spook or the atmosphere, and they forget that these are people and a story, and we need to connect with them. At least that's what I want to do. So I really like that he talks about that, and that he gives tips for that and really like pushes that idea. Now, for the cons of the book, I'm gonna be honest, there wasn't that many cons. I mean, there were some, don't get me wrong, but I definitely found overall it wasn't too bad in terms of con. So one of the things that I would say was probably the biggest con, and this is a big one. I mean, if you're gonna have a con, this is, you know, this is kind of up there. There's some advice. He gives it just only a little bit, but then he also includes other writers that also give it, and it's just kind of like an icky, but he basically promotes like mining other cultures for their mythology and their creatures. And while I think that people got away with that before. I'm not saying it was okay, because it was never okay, but I just don't think you can do that anymore. I just don't think that in 2021 people are going to be okay with you taking other cultural beliefs and appropriating them. So I didn't like that. I didn't like that I thought he was so good about talking about misogyny and racism and ableism, and then I was like, no, sweetie. And I think that this is like something that people would argue, and maybe he doesn't agree, and maybe some of you don't agree with that, but I'm just saying my opinion, I would not advise doing cultural appropriation and, like, you know, taking someone else's culture, mythology, their stories. I mean, their stories are so intricately linked to who they are as people and as a culture. I just don't think we should be just like taking them out of the context and using them. And I personally think that even if you found that okay, I don't think that most people in publishing today would find that okay. I think that publishing is finally putting the foot down in that, and if someone's gonna write about that cultural story, it should be someone from that culture whose story it is. So didn't really like that he included that in there. And then there was a section on like the horror's hero journey, and I was really excited about this section, and then I felt like it was maybe a little underwhelming. I did like that he broke down the different outcomes of the journeys, but I don't know, I was looking more for a beats type thing, and I didn't really get that. So if you're hoping to get like horror beats, that's not it. It doesn't happen in there. And I think that's what I was looking for. It's like, teach me how to write it, you know, which is fine. I'm sure a lot of people maybe weren't looking for that, but I just, when I saw like, oh, the horror's hero's journey, I was like, yes, this is what I need in my life. And then I just didn't quite get what I thought I needed in my life. You know what I'm saying? And then he also does include some concepts in there that he's kind of explaining that I had to read a couple of times before I fully understood, because he's like talking as like a writing teacher, and like, I would say like 99%, I mean, okay, actually I would say 100% of it is fully accessible to any kind of reader. But there was just some that I was like, I don't know, maybe it's just my brain that I was like, wait, what is an anchor? And I had to like reread it a couple of times. So I mean, I don't know. That's just a very little con. It's not like a super big con. Also, if you're new here, the snoring is my dog. So if you're new here, this is what to expect in my future videos. I always have to give a disclaimer just in case someone's like, what is that noise? But anyway, it's a very minor con, because I think it's mostly like my own brain farting here, like not understanding what he was saying, or maybe not fully giving my attention when he was explaining it, but that is something to think about. And then finally, the last con was chapter 19 in particular. He talks about limits, and I don't know, I just felt like that could have been developed a little bit more. And so really those were like the main cons, is that there's like 2 sections that I wish were developed more, and a few times he was explaining something that I had to kind of read a second or third time to understand. But overall, the only main con was the, you know, the advice about like mining cultures for things, you know, and that, I'm not laughing like as if it's not a big deal. I'm laughing because like, it's only like the big con, but it's kind of like a big con. Like I don't recommend that. Didn't like that he was pushing that. That's just my opinion. So overall, I really, really like this book. I definitely think that it really pushed the idea of why horror matters, and what you should do, and why you should take it seriously, and what power and options you have in writing horror, and it really just overall makes you more excited about the genre. And though it is geared towards horror, there is a lot in there about the importance of writing in general, of how to brainstorm, how to free write, do spiral, do beats. Like there's all kinds of like general writing advice that I think is really, really helpful. And I think it was important to emphasize that in the book, not because this is a book geared toward general writing advice, but it's some of the writing advice that maybe sometimes gets forgotten when you're writing a genre, particularly horror. Some of those things, like I said earlier, like character development, sometimes doesn't always get the attention that it really should. So I really appreciated that about the book, and I'm so glad that it has that in there. So my recommendation, who should read this book? If you plan to write horror, or even like a dark fantasy, paranormal, you have to read this book. I would say that it is a must. 100% can't get away without reading it. It will level up your writing. It will level up your confidence in the genre. It will, I think that this is like unavoidable. I think you have to read it. I really do. And especially if you want craft to help you, I don't think you're gonna find a better book out there for horror. I really don't. Now, if you don't plan to ever write anything that is horror, dark fantasy, paranormal, or even things that have like dark themes or dark things that happen, then you could probably skip this book. I do think it has some general writing advice, but I don't think it's enough to get you to read this book if you don't write horror. But I'm pretty sure if you're watching this video, you do write horror, or you want to write horror, or you are going to write something similar enough that if that's why you chose to watch this video, that I'm telling you, you need to read this book. So if you want to check out more details on the book, I will put all of the information down in the description, including a link. So make sure that you check that out. It is newer, as I said, so I don't know how accessible it is in like lots of places. So overall, 10 out of 10, would recommend. So glad I read it, so excited for it. Glad I was able to discuss it. Definitely plan to use it for all of my books moving forward. Cannot recommend it enough. What did you guys think of this review? Did this help you? Did this inspire you to want to read the book or to work on those horror dark fantasy? Comment down below and let me know if you have written a horror or plan to write horror, dark fantasy, or paranormal. I'd love to hear from you, especially since that's the stuff that I'm into. I'd love to connect with you down in the comments. And if you liked this review and you found it helpful, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. It lets YouTube know that other people might find this helpful as well. And if you'd like to get more writing craft content from me in the future and also want to watch my journey towards trying to become a traditionally published YA horror writer, and you're not already subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of my content. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!